Oh, one thing I want to point out, a lot of people that came to the plant classes like 2 years ago learned all this stuff, and then they came back and they're like, there were questions on angiosperms, we don't know what they are. We couldn't answer them, and I was like, Angiosperms is the fancy name for flowering plants, which is what all this information is about. So they actually knew it, they just didn't know they knew it because they didn't know the word angiosperm. So I'm going to make sure that you guys know that. I'm not going to wait for time for people to write because you have the PowerPoint and more. I want to take the time to actually explain it. Some of it doesn't need that much explanation. Should become familiar with the terms monocots and dicots. We've also talked about those as C3 and C4 plants before. So normal plants, like that we kind of think of like oak trees, and most of the plants around here are dicots. Monocots are your things like grass and sugar cane and corn. The way you're going to recognize a monocot from a dicot, you can go back. Here is a picture to kind of help you, but remember how we talked about the veins are parallel? So if you just picture like a blade of grass, the veins are all going the same direction, they're parallel, versus like an oak leaf or a Christmas tree, whichever this seems like, that helps, right? Okay, so the veins like branch out, that's a dicot, that's a monocot, okay? A couple of the other differences are, besides how the veins run, it also is the roots. If you just think of grass, I don't know if you ever have to pull grass out of your flower beds, like I spend half my summer doing. But the roots are really fibrous, they kind of fan out, and when you pull the grass out, they really take a lot of dirt with them, and then you have to shake off the huge chunks of dirt. So, fibrous roots, they actually get their name, monocot and dicot, from how many cotyledons they have, which means seed leaf. So it's like a little part of the embryo in the seed. So it's called the seed leaf. But anyway, obviously dicots have two, monocots have one, that's how they got their name, but that's not gonna help you that much. I think the more important is the parallel veins and the fibrous roots. Monocots and dicots, also their flowers come arranged differently. If you see in monocots, the flowers are arranged in threes, and the dicots in fours or fives. So you can see the various pictures there.
Wait, what about like grass?
Huh?
Like, you said grass was a monocot, right?
If it has flowers.
Okay.
Grass doesn't really flower.
Right.
So
Was it C3, C4?
yeah, and our normal like C3 plants that we've been studying are dicots, and our C4 are monocots. Here you can kind of see the roots, the very fibrous roots versus a taproot. So monocot, dicot. So if we go back, here's all just a description. I added this since I posted the PowerPoint, sorry. But just how like a monocot never becomes a tree. It only has like a little thin stem. Only dicots can be basically what we call woody plants, where they get wide and have wood and bark and all that. So we're going to actually be talking mostly about dicots today because more of the world's plants are dicots. So, okay, are we good? Okay. Ooh, this doesn't animate. Anyway, basically you just have to kind of like switch gears because we're so used to thinking about animals and animal cells and animal tissues. So like if I ask you to name animal organs, you could name a whole ton. But plant organs, the organs themselves are the roots, the stem, and the leaves. So those are the organs. Of course, organs are made out of different tissues. So if I ask you the animal tissues, hopefully you could tell me what are the 4 animal tissues? Muscular, epithelial, and nervous, okay? Hopefully we know the plants don't have muscular tissue. They don't have nervous tissue. So they do have something considered, it's pretty much the same as epithelial tissue, but it's called dermal tissue. And so they don't have any of the same tissues except for that. So if you look up there, we'll just go through the tissues and I'll show you a picture in a minute. But basically, the dermal tissue is going to make up the outside of the plant. That's what you're looking at when you look at the plant. You can't see the individual cells just like when you look at your skin. But when I look at you, basically, That's your epidermis that we're seeing. And so it's very, very similar. So the outside of the plant, whether it's the leaves, the roots, or the stem, are completely encased in dermal tissue. So what do you think is the function of dermal tissue?
Prevent water.
Okay, prevent water from evaporating, prevents water from coming in and flooding the cells.
Diseases.
So it prevents diseases from getting in and protection. So then we have a vascular tissue, which are the veins. They don't obviously have arteries and veins. They're all called veins. But basically there's two kinds of vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. You do have to memorize which is which. The best way to remember it is phloem food, even though phloem is pH and food is F. Same sound, so phloem food, xylem water. And X and W are both at the end of the alphabet, so. So the xylem is bringing, and the other way you can kind of think of it is the xylem is bringing water and minerals up from the root, and the phloem is kind of carrying the sugar down away from the leaves. So it basically carries the sugar away from the photosynthetic parts so that it can be stored other places and used other places. Obviously the roots need ATP to live, right? Those root cells, and the roots obviously don't photosynthesize because they're underneath the ground and there's no sunlight. So basically all the sugar that's made in the leaves has to be shipped to the roots and to the non-photosynthetic parts. And then each kind of plant tends to store its sugar in different places, so it also ships it to wherever it's stored. Like a potato, like stores all the sugar in the root as starch as the potato itself. Okay, so we have vascular tissue, and then we have ground tissue, which is basically the term, it's kind of like in human we have connective, it's like everything else. And so that's what ground tissue is. The photosynthetic cells are the ground tissue, all the supporting cells, all that are ground. And I don't think it's that important, but we're going to look at the vascular tissue. When the vascular tissue is in rings, the pith is on the inside and the cortex is on the outside. I don't really think that's that important of a distinction. So let's actually look at it picture-wise. And this was really nice because it's color-coded, and I think you have something similar in your book if you want to look in there. But you have it on the PowerPoint. So if we look, the dermal tissue is shown in white. So you see how it surrounds the roots, surrounds the stem, and surrounds the outside of the leaf. So that's all the dermal tissue. And then you see the ground tissue, which is in yellow, and you have ground tissue. If you look up at the leaf, that actually is a monocot leaf, and you see it here as well. But if you can see, the very outside of the leaf is the dermal, then the yellow inside is the ground, and then you can see the veins, which are in purple, the vascular tissue. This is what it looks like in the stem. This is your vascular tissue, your ground tissue, and then your dermal tissue. Yeah?
I'm just wondering, so the dermal tissue is the one that has the cuticle?
Yeah,
Everything else doesn't have?
right. Right, it's the epidermis that secretes the cuticle. There is no cuticle around the roots, I don't think, but in the leaf and the stem it is. And then here is the root down here. And so basically your vascular tissue in the root is in the center, and then you have the ground tissue, and then you have, again, your dermal tissue. So it's basically, I mean, that's it. That's the only tissues they have. We'll talk more about this later because actually, when we talk about plant transport, there's a ring of cells right around the vascular tissue, which really controls like what diffuses in. So not just anything from the groundwater can diffuse into the plant. So it kind of acts as like a barrier. Here's a real picture of a root, just again to emphasize the dermal tissue on the outside is just this singular ring. Then we have all the ground tissue, and then we have the vascular tissue.